Okay, and this is the third part of the cold reasons for the Cold War, and this one is on the worsening relations between USA and Soviet Union. Okay, so these are the 4 points that we're going through. I will probably record a separate lecture for the last one, which is the containment policy, which will take a long time to understand. Okay, so let's start off with the first one. Okay, devastation of Europe and rise of superpowers. So as I've already mentioned during the previous one, we looked at the temporary alliance during World War II when they were fighting Hitler. And so for this one, what they are after the war, the only two countries that were powerful and strong enough were the USA as well as the Soviet Union. The USA mainly because they are selfish idiots who didn't allow the war to be fought on their own grounds. That's why they remained mainly intact and rich. Whereas the Soviet Union, because of their sheer size, they are actually still quite a powerful. They have quite a powerful economy. And since most countries were devastated, okay, according to the points here in the slide, the USA and the Soviet Union, this is their chance to be the helpful country, and so therefore they would lend their assistance in economic terms to any of the countries that actually needed help. So therefore, it brought about the rise of these two superpowers. So when we mention the word superpowers, we're actually only referring to USA and Soviet Union only. Britain and France, which were considered the world powers during around the World War One period, they are no longer the superpowers, but they will so-called play a supporting role in supporting USA on the democracy side. So we will still see them here and there, lah. Okay. Uh, so now it's like a competition for influence between the superpowers. So as we have already mentioned, right, about the origins of the Cold War, not the origins, the analogy of the Cold War, where we see in the I Not Stupid movie. So you see that the father and the mother were communicating through the children. So imagine Soviet Union and USA to be like the father and the mother, and then the small little countries are their children. And it's a matter of who actually is able to win the children over to their side. Okay, that's basically what it means when they are competing for influence. Uh, Now, for the USA, what they fear was that the communist movement will continue to expand, and what they're afraid of is that the Soviet Union will continue to spread communism worldwide, lah. And this will affect them because economically they will lose the trading markets since the Soviet Union's communist system or the economic system is really drastically different from the democratic and the free market economy. So if any country were to become a communist country, the USA would actually lose the potential to trade with these countries. So therefore, of course, for the money's sake, they would definitely prefer the countries to be democratic, right? And for the Soviet Union side, what they were afraid of is their own security and survival. Okay, for if you remember from chapter 2 last year, when we look at Stalin, he was a super paranoid person. So it's the same case here. He's still alive after World War II, and what he would be trying to do is to ensure the survivability of Soviet Union on their own. Okay, and so in order to ensure that they survive, they will have to make sure that the countries surrounding them are friendly countries, and not any kind of democratic countries. So what Stalin actually did was to establish the ring of satellite states around Soviet Union through the use of salami tactics. Uh, what Stalin is actually doing here, okay, if you look at the map down here, alright, the red color one is Soviet Union down here, and then you see the pink color one would be the satellite states. Okay, so again, to explain the states carefully, yeah, for Soviet Union, they consist of the countries Russia and today what exists as Ukraine and Belarus and some others. Back then, they come under this thing called the Soviet Union. So the entire thing is Soviet Union. Ukraine is somewhere around here. Okay, then there are a few other countries all around here, but they will be referred to as the Soviet Union. Okay, the satellite states are states that actually are countries rather that stands on its own, and they have communist governments, and these communist governments would actually report to Soviet Union lah. Okay, so basically they have their own prime minister or president or the overall leader of the communist political party here in the respective countries, and they would report back to the USSR. Then the other countries, according to this map here, would be the other democratic countries mainly, and some neutral countries here and there. Okay, so going back, so what Stalin actually did was to establish all these communist countries in Soviet Union through the use of salami tactics. Basically, they would just cut down on the other democratic parties inside the countries, and to ensure that the communist parties actually come into power. For Stalin, it was a defensive measure, but for the USA, they saw it as an aggressive plan to expand communist influence. Okay, so as you can see down here, it's really the start of the miscommunication between the two of them when Stalin don't actually go to the USA and say that, hey, look, I'm going to, make these countries communist because I'm afraid of my own security. There isn't any communication taking place between Stalin and the USA. So for the USA, what they would interpret Stalin's actions is that it was a aggressive plan to expand communist influence. Okay. Right, next is a cartoon that you see in your textbooks on page 14. So the textbook also asks, okay, from the cartoonist perspective, what was Stalin trying to do? And if you were one of the leaders of the Western powers at that point in time, how would you actually respond to this cartoon? And so when you look at this cartoon, you would interpret Stalin as the one being very aggressive, and he's the one who is trying to plant communist influence in these countries. Of course, this is without understanding what is Stalin's actual intentions when he's doing this. Okay, it's merely based on their interpretation and their guessing of what Stalin's intentions are. Okay, so coming back to this point, you can think about the SEQs for this question. Remember, for this entire time, for these few lectures here, we are actually looking at the reasons why the Cold War started. So when you look at this point, one of the possible questions that they can give you would be something like, Stalin's actions was responsible for the start of the Cold War. And then when you look at the given factor that is Stalin's actions, you would think about this thing that he started off establishing the Soviet satellite states. And is this really the factor that caused and started the entire Cold War? So at the same time, you also need to consider this in a chronological order. Okay, sorry, it's getting a bit messy now, but so let me go back. So if you look at from the point of the end of the war, the first actions that were being taken was actually by Stalin. Okay, but before that, prior to that, would you consider the alliance during World War II as the start of the Cold War, or when exactly do you actually consider the start of the Cold War to be? So that in effect would actually influence your essay. Okay, just a thought. Okay, just to think about that. So let's not confuse ourselves now. We finish up with this first before we actually start to think about the SEQs, which we will be working on in the classrooms. Okay, I think I'm gonna end here, and I'm gonna do the containment policy on another lecture altogether, because that would take a really long time. Alright, so that's it for this part of the lecture.